Welcome to this edition of Meet America. I'm Annie Griffin, your host, and we're talking tonight about the possibility of fracking in Monterey County and what it means to our water and to the ability of more earthquakes happening here, and a petition that is circling to ban fracking in Monterey County, and the possibility of that petitioning becoming a reality, being thwarted by corporations such as Trader Joe's, Target here locally, Costco, that won't allow petitioners in front of their stores to access shoppers so that they can realize that this is so important to them. So I want to welcome Chad he's a petitioner. Thank you so much for being with us today, Chad.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us what your experience has been in petitioning and why it's so important to you?
Well, we're talking about the fracking situation,
yes.
Right? Well, the fracking industry is making a very vigorous inroads into Monterey County to introduce fracking to the county. They're running very sophisticated, they're running commercials every hour, television advertisements. So we've responded to that as Protect Monterey County with a very ground up, on the street campaign to raise public awareness about the horrors of fracking, and also to educate them, and also to have them put their name to a referendum, as you will, or a petition to get it onto the ballot for this November. Yes, to get it on the ballot for this November. So we can have a ban, an outright ban on fracking in Monterey County. As you introduced the situation, we have a propensity for earthquakes in Monterey and in all of California, and we also have very, very severe water issues. Even though we've been blessed with lots of rain recently, we have an ongoing drought, and to play roulette with what little water we have, the fracking industry uses a lot of water, but also...
1 million gallons per fracking well, I understand.
Yes. And it contaminates the water, so it gets back in. There are pollutants, there are chemicals, there are solvents. They release a lot of things that shouldn't be released in the ground that are there protected, and also they add their own chemicals to the whole stew. And you have situations on the East Coast where people literally had flames coming out of their faucets. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that the fracking industry in California won't be more rigorous with their safety measures, but nonetheless, it's not a leak-proof industry, and it can very much have detrimental, long-suffering consequences, long damaging consequences to our environment. So yeah, so we've been on the streets getting signatures, and we've met some resistance with the more corporate businesses in the area who are claiming domain of entire parking lots, even though they are sharing it with other businesses, saying that we cannot exercise our freedom to speech, our First Amendment right, to raise awareness of something that can be very damaging to the environment and community here, and also to educate people, because a lot of people, I'm saying maybe a third of people I speak to on the street have not heard of fracking. They don't even know what it is. And these TV commercials are saying they're marketing as energy independence. That's their slogan. However, there's definitely a need for wider awareness as to what the potentials of fracking can be and how it can be very, very, very damaging. I mean, other parts of the United States have had really bad stories. Oklahoma is a place not famous for earthquakes. They've had 1,000+ earthquakes. I've even heard they're having 20 earthquakes a day there. That's very much in the realm of public media. Actually, that's mainstream news. So getting back to the encroachment of the corporations, basically the oil industry, on our very special environment we have here in Monterey. We have a very unique natural environment here, and it's very beautiful. Plus we have agriculture here. To jeopardize that with the fracking industry, just another example of how far the corporations are going to squeeze everything they can out of our lives. And not taking on a battle with Trader Joe's, but just to say that they have been very hostile to any of this knowledge being shared in their vicinity of their buildings, along with some other establishments that you mentioned. So again, it's an example of a corporation they've basically taken over our public spaces, our places. We've seen this over the years. The shopping mall, the shopping center is now the place where people come and meet and mix.
The local people.
Yeah, because our high streets are being drained of energy. Although we have Alvarado Street here in Monterey, but our public places, we have a public square here which no one uses. It's actually full of it's got a big marquee tent in it. It's usually used for events, fancy car shows and things like that. So we don't really have many places where we can meet the public. So and that's
the local public.
Yeah, so the local public. So that's our freedom of speech is being threatened. There was a Supreme Court ruling in 1980, Pruneyard Shopping Center versus Robbins, where this very issue came up. There were some young students petitioning an issue in a shopping center, and it went to the California Supreme Court, and it was ruled in their favor that they were fulfilling a public duty or public something that was as much of value to the public as is health and safety or as is environmentalism. They were actually how should I say, they were exercising their role of freedom of speech in a public place, and that's very important. That wherever the public are invited, even if it's private property, that you have a right to exercise your free speech there. And as I said, we don't have places to put soapboxes. We don't have village squares. This is what we have nowadays. This is like the 21st century. So again, the corporations are kind of dictating where we can speak, where we can't speak, and they're literally fracking the ground beneath our feet, potentially. So we, have an issue here which we wish to address, and that's why I came here today. And thank you.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here today, and so I want to thank you so much, Chad, for being with us today. Folks, this is so important because we all drink water, and if we can't cleanse our blood every day of pure, good water, that's why we're so filled with cancers and all kinds of neural diseases, and it's actually been proven now that the air pollution has these nanoparticles in it that are destroying our brains. And you can go online, Science News, and it talks about that, so how it's lowering our IQ. And so the local Trader Joe's here, right in the center and heart of Monterey, where they used to be very friendly to petitioners, is now become very virulent and, in my opinion, aggressive. And there is a gray area here. They're giving us this paperwork that has proven, according to them, several times that the California courts, Supreme Courts, have ruled in favor of them. But we also have the Pruneyard court ruling, which rules in our favor. So there is a gray area. And Trader Joe's is a German company. It's owned by Germans. And this is what Hitler did. He started by taking away free speech rights, and then he started by taking away citizens' guns. And so to me, Trader Joe's, which is a foreign company, they're coming into our country, making money with us, and at the same time taking away very aggressively our rights to free speech. So we have no way to access the public in a big way and get these signatures on time to protect our area and our water and our air from fracking. So I hope that you will call that number there, and when you go to Trader Joe's, complain to them, and if necessary, boycott them. Boycott Safeway, boycott Target, and let them know that this is what you're doing. And say, shame on you, corporations, for destroying our right to free speech. And that is what, if you're a Costco member, sign in when they ask you, your opinion, sign on that opinion sheet that they have, that you want them to allow petitioners, because petitioners is the voice of America. And yes, Chad, you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted, my microphone again. I just want to make the distinction between what is like how should I say, a violation of someone's passageway into a store. If you're standing there just expressing an opinion on the sidelines and you're not obstructing the entrance, then there's no reason why you are damaging the experience of the person going into shop. So that's really important to make that distinction. And Trader Joe's in Monterey, they've basically said the whole parking lot is theirs, even though they share the parking lot with several other businesses, at least 4 or 5. So they've claimed domain over this whole parking lot. They're not a standalone store, and there's a lot of other things going on in that parking lot. So the overreach has been a little bit too much. And just to say also that, yeah, we have a limited time. We only have a month to get 20,000 signatures. And that's just the first step in what is a series of steps to stop fracking from happening in Monterey County. And as I say, we don't have the funds or resources to run sophisticated TV commercials or things of that nature. We are just very much a groundswell movement. So that's why it's really important that we have access to places where the public come. And Trader Joe's and other businesses have taken all the public, in a sense, away places where we can access them. So this is very important that we have this right. And we want to work in cooperation with Trader Joe's. We don't want to create any hostility. I don't care if they're a German company or not personally. I just really wish to have a working relationship with them where we can benefit each other. I shop in Trader Joe's every day, almost. So, I think that we could be more cooperative. And also, the very important point is that we're not going to have local agriculture as we knew it, as we have known it here. If we start fracking, we start watering our plants with frack water, that's what brings to mind another issue. I had an issue with the farmers market in MPC. They're also hostile to people petitioning even on their perimeters, even though they are selling organic vegetables there. So, we have to all work together and realize we're all on the same page and try to keep each other as equals and see how we can communicate better. That's all I have to say today. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to add here, the reason I mentioned Trader Joe's being owned by Germans is the Germans should know better, because history does repeat itself if we don't learn our lessons. And the German people had to suffer great consequences because they didn't pay attention to what Hitler was doing. And therefore they were complacent in allowing the free speech to be taken away and the guns to be taken away. And then finally the Jews to be taken away. And by that time they didn't have the choice, because they were tortured if they spoke out. And so we're at that point now in history where our free speech is greatly threatened throughout America by these corporations, and Trader Joe's has to take responsibility for that in a big way. We cannot shield them and say, oh, we apologize for the fact that you're doing this to us. This is wrong. And they should know it's wrong, and they, more than any other company, should say, we are not going to interfere with the America's right for free speech. And so that's why I mention that, and I think that's very important to keep strong on that point, because history does repeat itself if we don't learn our lessons. So I want to thank you, Chad, so much. Do you have, I just want to mention here the fact that Dave Potter and Jane Parker, our county supervisors, both voted to ban fracking in Monterey County. It was a temporary ban, and that would have stopped what is happening now. Supervisor Armenta, Supervisor Salinas, and Supervisor Phillips, I was there at that meeting, all voted against that ban. And so these people, in my opinion, should not even be county supervisors, because they are here to represent the health of the people that live here, our air, our water. That has to be number one. And if they don't have the strength or integrity to do that, they need to resign. They need to step down. We need strong, good people. Now remember, Plato said it a long time ago. The price of apathy is to be ruled by evil men. Okay, I'm going to say it again. The price of apathy is to be ruled by evil men. So please, go to Trader Joe's, let them know you saw this show, tell them you do not approve of them taking away our free speech rights. Go to Target, go to Costco, and enough of us talking about this just may change their minds. God help us if they don't. Chad, I'll give you the last word on this.
Oh, yes. Well, again, I want to thank you personally for all the things you did to protect our water years ago, getting the fluoride out of our water, or not happening in our water. So thank you. You're a crusader for healthy water. and it's an honor to be here with you. Yeah, I would just like to say that we're having to do this because our elected leaders have not taken the initiative like they did in Santa Cruz County to stop fracking. So we're following the model of San Benito County, who did a ground operation, and they were successful in banning the fracking industry. So it is within our reach, and we will accomplish it. And most people I speak to on the street are very much against fracking, and they're very happy that we're doing this. So we do have the support of the public, absolutely, in this. And it's very much a local thing, and it affects everybody. We're all drinking from the same well. So I just want to say that if you see somebody in the street and has a petition to sign against a fracking movement, just let them know you support them, and know that we were having to do this because our own elected leaders let us down, in the sense that they even ignored the advice of their planning commission, their own staff, who said, do not frack Monterey County. So they went against their advice of their own staff. So we need to know what's going on. We need to look deeper into these things. And we would like to, have the people, this is a referendum, so we're asking the people all to have a say. Everyone has a voice. Apathy creates a vacuum that gets filled by corporatocracy, basically, and we all know this now. We're waking up to this. So now is the time to really stand up for your rights, your First Amendment rights. Thank you.
Station called Could fracking wells be responsible for a recent rash of earthquakes? Well, a recent study published in an issue of Science magazine suggests there's a direct link between the abundance of fracking wastewater injection wells and seismic activity in states like Oklahoma, where there's been a large growth in the number of these wells. Now, this study, I believe it was a peer-reviewed study that was co-authored by Cornell University geophysics professor and research seismologist Katie Kiranen. She studied the data regarding these swarms of earthquakes near the small town of Jones, Oklahoma. Jones, Oklahoma is a place that has become one of the most earthquake-prone parts of the state. Now, they chose Oklahoma because before 2008, Oklahoma averaged only about 3.0 magnitude earthquake every year. Compared to 2014, Oklahoma had over 230 of those seismic events. That's pretty amazing. Another one of the study's co-authors, Jeffrey Abers, told Nature magazine that it is really unprecedented to have this many earthquakes over a broad region like this. Yep. They decided to study this using a unique methodology. Now, what they did is that they fed data regarding earthquake information and disposal well locations, the times, the pressures, and the wastewater volume measurements into a computer model. It was a 3D computer model of the underground areas of where they were measuring. So they would actually get a 3D model of the actual area. Kind of fascinating. Now, what they found is that a small number of wastewater injection sites could be responsible for the large increases in seismic activities across the state. Now, according to Raw Story, quote, researchers believe that the earthquakes are caused by overpressuring, a fault system, which is basically to say they injected too much wastewater into the ground, and that will cause tectonically stable areas to slip. It results not only in a single earthquake, but a redistribution of pressures along an entire fault system. This is what Abers and his team believe is happening in Oklahoma. Now, also, this research shows that wastewater travels a lot further away underground from a disposal site than they previously had thought. So there you go. Now, one more thing. To those that are saying that if we banned wastewater injection right away and fracking in general, that those earthquakes would go away, right? Not so much. Kiranen states that it would take likely years for this fluid pressure that's already there to diffuse away. So you'd pretty much see earthquakes continuing. So, with all of that information out there, I want to go to my panel. Let's go to you, Becca, first, since you are an Oklahoma native.
I am, and there were actually a few things about this story that I thought were particularly striking, because I think as a population, people often look at Oklahomans as being sort of behind, and in fact, often act as if like, oh, well, they're okay with this. Like, they aren't environmentally concerned. They aren't going to be interested in these kinds of issues. Just to speak sort of broadly of the stereotypes of the state. But, in fact, one of the stories referenced a June 26th meeting that was actually held in the church that I grew up in, where hundreds of citizens were coming out and saying, we're not okay with this. We see that other states have done things to stop this or to pause it while these important studies are being completed. And we don't approve of the amount of power being given to these corporations in our state. So there is a real citizens' pushback against this. The power that those corporations do have in the state, though, is pretty exceptional. A couple of things that really make this particularly concerning, aside from just the huge increase and the fact that Oklahoma hasn't passed the measures other states have, also 80% of the state of Oklahoma is within at least 9 miles or less of at least one of the 4,000 wells. Now, they did say that for this particular study, we're looking at high-volume wastewater injection wells. So that would limit some of the impact, but it's a huge, widespread problem still. It's very troubling to me, at least. I don't understand. I won't say I don't understand. That would indicate greater naivete than I actually possess. But it's incredibly frustrating to me that things are being halted on the justification of, oh, that might hurt my religious beliefs, and we can't pause for a few seconds to say, is this actually tearing the physical land of our country apart?
Right, and I think that's a really good way to look at it. Sean, why don't you weigh in on this?
Well, I mean, nobody looks at the bright side when they see these stories. 230 earthquakes a year. You could be the earthquake state. Like, that's a sign of improvement.
That's like the worst.
We already have the tornado state, and we're just fine with that.
Yeah, you guys could be the Roland Emmerich state, because he's like the master of all disaster films. But obviously this is a disaster. And the thing about this study is it's not like these are a bunch of like crazy people who hate like hydraulic fracturing. They're saying that specific wells that use high volume injection are causing this. They're not saying get rid of all fracking or anything like that. They're like, just stop injecting so much water into the ground. And like, I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything about like how these work except for like the basics. And the basics are you inject water in to cause mini earthquakes. So it's not that much of a stretch that if you inject too much water in the wrong place, that you're going to create a situation where there's a lot more earthquakes. So it sounds logical. It's not like it might take years to fix, but it's not like it's that hard of a problem to identify. They focused on very specific rigs in it, so you know which ones to limit or stop. I think that Oklahomans should do something about this. But the reasons that they probably won't is because natural gas is such a boom in that state. And it's a lot of jobs and campaign contributions and energy. Just a whole bunch of reasons.
Right. I was actually going to mention some of those reasons, but yeah, you got it right. I mean, Oklahoma's a natural gas state, and they've been having similar issues in places like Texas and I believe it was Pennsylvania, everywhere that they've been setting up these new types of fracking rates. And it's not some of the conservative talking points that are like, oh, no, fracking, that's fine, fracking's safe, whatever. We've been doing it safely for 60 years. Yeah, but we've actually developed some new ways of doing it, which have been able to have us access some of a lot of this natural gas. That's why we're having a boom with new technologies. Well, with these new technologies comes new dangers, but nobody considered that. We're just like, I don't know, drill, baby, drill. Let's get in there. Let's get that natural gas. This is the problem with people, is that we don't have a foresight. We don't have a foresight when we start to do things like this. We just think about, how's it going to benefit us now? We don't care about later. Well, this is what happens when you do that. Because now the later is showing that, look, we've got all sorts of little mini earthquakes happening, and it's only going to get worse. Good job. And nobody's going to do anything about it. It's sad to say that no matter how many protests are against it, and people who are getting together at churches to have these town halls and getting pissed and wanting to shut down fracking and everything like that, their voices are never going to get heard because money rules our democracy. It is an oligarchy now, and that is the problem. These corporations are not going to stop fracking. They're not going to release, they're not going to release the proprietary mixes of chemicals, what's in them, so that we know. No, they're not going to do anything like that, and they're always going to deny any damages. What? It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It's not the fracking.
Jeff, it's not just like the corporate power and all that. Like, if
you're right. It's not just the corporate power. It is the jobs. It is the politicians. It's all of that. You're right.
It's not only that. If you're one of those people who they found natural gas under their house, like, we're one of the most unique countries in the world where if they find resources under your house, those resources are yours. So, like, it's also people getting royalty checks. It's like there's a whole bunch of, like, constituencies that would be in favor of more fracking, even if it causes a little bit of earthquakes.
Well, if you can remember, Josh Fox was one of those people that they had found natural gas under his house. He was the filmmaker of Gasland and Gasland 2. And so that's what started the whole documentary, is they said, hey, we're going to go purchase your land so we can drill on it, so we can frack on it.
Technically, they weren't buying his land. They just were drilling for the gas that was under his property because, according to American property rights, that's your gas. But it's not. They weren't going to tear down his house.
Well, no, but they were going to pay him a substantial amount of money. And so, Anyway, back to you. Do you have anything to throw in?
Yeah, I guess one more thing that I think is really interesting here is the current study is specifically looking at the wastewater injection. So it's not even the original fracking. It's what we're doing to get rid of that water. That said, Oklahoma, the entire time I was growing up there, was essentially a drought state. It was accepted that we would go into drought from about May until about August. Now, I lived in central Oklahoma, not in the eastern part of the state that's a little less miserably dry all the time. One of the options for what to do with that wastewater is to set up irrigation. Now, most resources on it are suggesting that it's a pretty expensive system to set up, fairly expensive to maintain, but usually you get to innovations that make technology more affordable by using it. And a system that uses this wastewater for irrigation in a state that's prone to droughts anyway, and in a state that really can't afford a 22,000+% increase in earthquakes, if there is a place on Earth that could, I think that irrigation option would be worth looking into from the government's perspective. Then they get to keep their contracts and maybe create some new. I
don't see that happening. I just see them doing the cheapest option and throwing it in, putting it back in the ground or putting it in these pits that will sit there and pollute the area. I just don't. There's not a lot of good options here.
Well, and there are areas that have used the irrigation option. It's something that's been looked into. It's just, you're right. Absolutely. The problem is it's expensive to clean it. But the way to force companies to do that would be better regulation, would be these citizens, instead of just the town hall meetings, make it matter. Stop voting on the social issues that aren't going to hurt anybody. That's the reason you keep electing these people that are in big business's pocket. And instead, vote for the people who are going to say, no, you can't do that just because you also won't let Fred and Sam get married. Like, they're voting against their own interests because of these social issues.
So you've heard the arguments. Put that wastewater that has toxic chemicals that we have absolutely no way of purifying on our fields. That's already happening in California, even on some organic farms, according to Food and Water Watch. So, we don't have a very vigilant concern for water. We've got so many other issues. And even though water is the most important issue and clean air is the most important issue, it's on back burners in everyone's mind, and that's why Flint, Michigan is in the state of upheaval it's in, and that's why the U.S. Attorney General is not as of now, paying any attention or planning to prosecute the governor responsible for making the decision of the lead in Flint, Michigan. So if she's not going to be paying attention to that, how can we be sure that these fracking companies are going to do their job and spend billions of dollars, literally, on reverse osmosis and expensive filtration systems that are going to cost them millions and millions of dollars to make sure our water's carefully, filtered before they can dump it on our fields? They're not going to do it. So we have to come up with other ways of energy, and one of them is solar on rooftops. I keep telling everyone, if every rooftop in America had solar energy on it, and Solar City is one of the companies that will lease your rooftop for free and put solar panels on there for free, this is one of the answers to not having to use natural gas. And there are solar ovens so that you don't have to use natural gas. There are ways where we can go back to using wood to heat our water. And we don't have to chop down trees. We can just go in the forest and clean up the debris in the forest that needs to be cleaned up because it's causing infernal fires throughout our national forests. So if people would go and collect kindling and pine cones and fallen branches and fallen dead trees, we wouldn't have the fires we have today in our national parks and forests. So these are all alternatives that businesses could go in and clean up the forest floor and do that, and they need to be looked at. So the most important thing, though, here in California is we do have an incredible risk of earthquake damage. And we cannot afford to allow these fracking companies and these politicians that are listening to these fracking companies come over and just destroy California as we know it, and as these other states are now facing, who at one point were not earthquake targeted zones.
In Screwed News, just a few weeks ago, we told you on this program how fracking was likely behind a surge of earthquakes in Oklahoma. Well, you can now add Colorado to that list of states experiencing seismic activity as a result of fracking. According to an investigation led by a team of scientists at the University of Colorado Boulder, a fracking wastewater injection well owned by a company called NGL Water Solutions is likely responsible for as many as 200 earthquakes in the Rocky Mountain state. That well had been closed by state regulators in June after a series of earthquakes struck nearby, but was reopened just a few weeks later. The findings by the UC Boulder team suggest that that was probably a bad idea. So just how real is the connection between fracking and earthquakes? And if there is a real connection, what does that tell us about how we should regulate natural gas extraction going forward? Joining me now for more on this are two experts in the field, Dr. Tony Ingrafia, Dwight C. Baum Professor of Engineering and Vice Presidential Teaching Fellow at Cornell University, and Tyson Slocum, Director of Public Citizens Energy Program. And welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, great to be here, Tom.
Thank you, Tyson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Ingrafia, walk us through this. What appears to be causing these earthquakes?
There are two distinct impacts resulting from fracking in shale for gas or oil that are causing human-induced, or I should say industry-induced seismicity. One is a direct impact, fracking itself. That is, the actual action of stimulating a gas or oil well in a shale formation has been confirmed as causing industry-induced seismicity. That's a direct result of fracking. It's not as well known, it's not as well studied, it hasn't happened in as many places yet. The indirect result, the indirect impact is the result of the production of large quantities of fluid waste from the fracking process, that fluid waste is transported to what are known as Class 2 waste injection wells, like the one that you just mentioned in Colorado. And those large volumes of fluid are injected into these waste injection wells over a long period of time at sufficient pressure that they are, in effect, lubricating or changing the pressure profile on existing faults and causing what faults do when they slip, earthquakes.
Yeah. Is this, Dr. Ingrafia, if I could just define the difference between these in really, really simple terms. When you frack, you drill down into the shale formation, you inject liquids under pressure that crack it, but then you pull them back out and you pull out the gas that comes with it. So the pressure's been relieved, essentially. Am I so far correct?
Yes.
Okay. But on the other hand, now you've got all this wastewater that came out with the gas or the oil or whatever it is you're fracking out, and you've got to get rid of this stuff, and you want to get rid of it in a way where it's not going to come back out again. You're just going to stash it and leave it. So when you drill the injection wells for the wastewater, you're pumping that stuff down under the water or down under the earth at enormous pressure and just leaving it there. Does that mean that the injection wells would be more likely to cause earthquakes than the fracking because you're not relieving the pressure, you're just increasing pressure and then leaving it there?
Maybe, maybe not. That part of the science hasn't been firmed up yet, but let me just point out that there are limits, regulatory limits, on the pressure that one can use to inject waste in an injection well. There is no limit on the pressure that one uses to frack a well. So there are two distinct mechanisms here. In the case of the injection well, you're injecting very large quantities, millions of gallons of waste, tens of millions of gallons of waste, at moderate pressures at one point in one well. Remarkable. And if you're just unlucky enough to have that well intersect a fault that's ready to go, then you have what's happened in Colorado, in Arkansas, in Oklahoma, in Texas, Ohio, British Columbia, England. But on the other hand, fracking involves many, many wells with less volume of fluid in each well, even though you still have millions of gallons per well, but at much higher pressure in over very large regions.
I see.
So the science isn't quite done yet as to what you refer to as the risk. What's the probability of having a moderate to severe earthquake resulting from either the direct or indirect result of fracking?
Right. You've got variables going 16 ways to Sunday. Tyson Slocum, why is it that this is not? I know Josh. I'm forgetting. Josh Fox came out with Gasland a couple of years ago. I mean, this has been kind of floating around the edge of the environmental movement and people who are living in gas country, but it really hasn't. It's only starting, it seems, to get some traction at the national level in terms of press and publicity. Why is that?
Well, I think first because a lot of the opposition to fracking has revolved more around issues of water contamination and water quality issues, air quality issues, and quality of life concerns around fracking. And
NIMBY issues.
Right, exactly. Not so much fracking. And as the professor pointed out, most of the seismic activity has been around these waste wells and not necessarily around the active fracking oil and gas sites. But you have seen a lot of news in the states that are affected. I mean, California has already banned several waste wells, as did Arkansas, in direct response to what they confirmed was seismic activity as a result of those. The question is what the EPA is going to do about it, the Environmental Protection Agency. The GAO, an independent watchdog agency of the federal government, just released a study blasting the EPA for doing a terrible job in overseeing these waste wells. Now, there's more than 170,000 of these things scattered around the country, but there's been a huge increase in the use of them as fracking has taken off, because fracking has really just boomed since 2008 or so, and so we've seen a huge growth in the need to dispose of tens of millions of gallons of contaminated fluid.
Tyson, you think that maybe the FDA is not doing their job because there's such a revolving door in Washington, and a significant number of the people who are charged with ultimately making those decisions are looking at the possibility of $1 million a year when they retire working for the industry?
That might be it. I think more of it has to do with the fact that the Obama administration has decided that natural gas and therefore fracking has to be an integral part of our energy policy going forward.
So they're willing to put up with the side effects of it.
Right, and you know, the EPA has the authority under the Safe Drinking Water Act to say, listen, these seismic activity can impact negatively these drinking water aquifers and other things, because the seismic activity could bust apart and compromise the integrity of these wells, which could lead to higher rates of contamination.
Dr. Ingraffia, we have about a minute and a half here. Is there an issue of best practices here? In other words, is there a way to frack and dispose of waste that doesn't produce these consequences, or is this just built into the system?
The direct impact is built into the system. If you're going to frack, you're going to frack. And if you're going to frack, you run the risk of causing industry-induced seismicity. The waste disposal process, as Tyson pointed out, there are regulations on the books for different types of waste injection wells. But when the EPA wrote the rules for Type 2 injection wells that take waste from oil and gas, they did not include seismic investigations. So they could very easily rewrite that regulation that says you may not inject waste into a well where you have done a seismic investigation and determined that there is a fault system that is likely to be impacted by that waste.
Right.
That's the
Tyson, in the 30 seconds we have left, do you see any evidence that there is going to be a regulatory change here in Washington, D.C. or in the states?
Well, it's going to take a lot of grassroots and political pressure on the EPA and on Congress to make sure they act. The easiest thing that they can do is to stop creating all of this waste to be injected. And so either you limit fracking or you require companies that are doing the fracking to recycle 100% of the fracking fluid that comes back out of the formation.
Okay. Tyson Slocum, Dr. Tony Ingraffia, thank you both for being with us tonight.
Thank
My pleasure.
Great to have you.
Bye-bye.
Well, we have a lot of naysayers on global warming. George Norrie of Coast to Coast, who influences 20 million people on his show, Alex Jones, many of these radio commentators absolutely deny global warming. But there are some very, very sinister things that are happening as a result of global warming. We've heard them all, from Hurricane Katrina to Hurricane Sandy. We've never seen such storms in my lifetime. I certainly haven't. In the 70 years I've been on this earth. It's, you know, the poles have melted, basically, that they never had before in our lifetime. And we have these radio commentators that are trying to tell us, oh, it's a natural cycle, but we are speeding it up. And so now there's these mysterious holes. And this is something that should cause us great, great concern.
In other news, earlier this month we told you about the giant hole that was spotted in the heart of the Siberian wilderness. Helicopter pilots flying over the Yamal, Pennsylvania, discovered the giant crater-like hole in the Siberian tundra. The hole is large enough to fit several of the very helicopters that discovered it, in between 150 and 250 feet in diameter. At first sight, the hole appears to have been made by some sort of blast. It's thought to be around 2 years old. And now it's not alone. 2 more mysterious giant holes have been discovered in the area. The first new hole, spotted by reindeer herders in northern Siberia, is similar in appearance to the old hole, but is smaller, 50 feet in diameter. The second new hole, discovered by reindeer herders hundreds of miles away, is even smaller, just 13 feet across. Scientists who studied the first hole are now en route to the other 2 to see what they can learn. The official explanations for the holes still haven't been released, but one of the more plausible explanations for the giant holes that's being floated around comes from Anna Kurchakova from the Subarctic Scientific Research Center in Russia. She told the Siberian Times that the crater likely was formed by a water, salt, and gas mixture igniting an underground explosion, the result of global warming. That gas that she's referring to, that's methane. Methane is one of the strongest of the natural greenhouse gases. 80 times more potent than CO2 at warming up the planet. And while it may not get as much attention as its cousin CO2, it certainly can do far more damage to our planet. In the case of the original giant crater, Kurchatova believes that it was melted and released methane that interacted with other elements to create that massive explosion. Based on the similarities between the new holes and the original one, it's likely that the new ones were also caused by similar methane-fueled explosions. It's also likely that we'll start seeing even more of these mysterious holes because the permafrost and the Arctic sea ice that currently trap trillions of tons of methane underground are melting at unprecedented rates thanks to global warming and climate change. So unless we want Siberia and perhaps other regions across the globe to start looking like a scene out of the popular book and movie Holes, it's time to do everything in our power to keep that methane right where it is, trapped underground.
Connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Today on Earth Focus, the risks of natural gas development in the Marcellus Shale, from toxic chemicals in drinking water to unregulated dumping of potentially radioactive waste. Are the health consequences worth the economic benefits? Coming up on Earth Focus. It's called Marcellus Shale, and it contains enough natural gas to supply all U.S. gas needs for 14 years. But gas development here can be a catastrophe in the making. Toxic chemicals and methane gas seep into drinking water. And now, experts fear something worse: radioactive radium in waste products. The gas business may be booming, but at what price for people? Britain's Ecologist TV explores the social and ecological consequences of gas extraction in the Marcellus Shale in this original investigative report.
This is Bradford County, northeastern Pennsylvania. This previously quiet corner of America is now at the center of a rush for natural gas, extracted through a new drilling technology called hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking. But as the ecologist discovered, fracking is a high-risk process that threatens to both destroy the environment and wreck lives.
Makes me mad. Makes me very mad. Because my life is over without my water.
There was just like this red, nasty water just coming, just oozing out the side of the mountain, just the side of the hill.
And now hydraulic fracturing is heading for Europe. The UK, Poland, France and Germany are all next in the frack firing line. This is a picture postcard part of America, but beneath these rolling hills lies a seam of gas-rich rock called Marcellus Shale. But the shale gas is far from easily accessible.
The process itself is that you drill down a few thousand feet into a layer of very dense shale, turn the well horizontally, go out and perform some other operations. Eventually you set off charges that blow holes in the pipe, and then you fill up the pipe with a liquid. And the intent is basically to get sand back in the cracks of the rock to hold it apart so the gas will flow.
Gas drilling sites, or frack pads as they are known, have begun to appear all over the countryside, but these are just the tip of the iceberg. Professor Tony Ingraffia is one of the world's leading pioneers of fracture mechanics.
The fact is that Pennsylvania is 3 years into a 30-year large-scale industrial development. There are fewer than 2,000 Marcellus wells in Pennsylvania right now, but they're drilling them at the rate of 4 to 5 per day, and the rate at which they're being drilled is increasing. The industry intends to drill between 3,000 and 5,000 wells per year for the next 30 years in Pennsylvania, and if they get their way, in New York.
With many farmers struggling to remain profitable, the large royalty payments offered for land means that many are readily selling off their mineral rights. For others, there is also the promise of new jobs. And on a national level, it is argued that shale gas is a step towards energy independence. But in the rush to drill, concerns about the potential risks of fracking are being swept aside.
When I first heard about shale drilling, it sounded like a pretty good idea. The thing that really got me interested and concerned was I found out that under the proposed regulations for New York State, you could drill a gas well 150 feet from this river or the lake that feeds it, which is the water source for this village. And that's just insane.
One of the first problems observed in communities close to intensive fracking sites has been the contamination of domestic water supplies. The ecologist spoke to families who have been unable to drink water from the tap since the gas companies started fracking on land close to their homes.
And I didn't tell Ronnie anything about it until probably a couple days later because it got worse. I thought maybe this will go away. I don't know what it is, but it didn't. And I said to him, I said, you know, we have a problem with our water.
Water is a commodity. You might not think it is when you have it and it's good, but when you lose it, it's gone. You'll never get it back. Like we would take a glass of water out of the tap and it would have like an oil base on the top. You could smell it. It would smell like diesel fuel or some kind of oil thing. You know, I used to go to my sink and get a glass of water. I can't do that anymore. I have to put lotion on my hands 3 times a day from using the water. Even wash my dishes or wash my clothes or anything.
Meanwhile, increased levels of methane gas in water supplies have been reported in areas of intensive drilling.
This is the water that's in my well, and supposedly I'm supposed to be drinking this.
One of the key problems with the fracking process is its reliance upon huge volumes of water that are combined with an array of harmful chemicals. Carolyn Knapp is an organic farmer.
I don't believe that they should be allowed to put chemicals into my ground, chemicals that are not allowed by my certification to be put in the ground, chemicals that I feel can do harm to my family, to the people around me, and I feel violated.
None of those chemicals are potable. You know, methanol, hydrochloric acid, ethylene glycol, it's about 0.5% of the fracking fluid is a chemical, or is it really a cocktail of chemicals? And but do the math on that. That means that's 5,000 gallons per well is chemicals, or toxic chemicals that goes in. So if there's 8 wells per pad site, that's 40,000 gallons of toxic chemicals.
And we're losing farms far too quickly as it is, and to have one more circumstance that makes us lose the farms quicker is all the quicker that they'll be gone. There will be no more small family farms.
The rush for gas has had other effects on the local community. Small towns have become clogged with gas industry trucks.
I have to say the days of having a nice conversation sitting out in front of the diner are long gone. Main Street's noisier and louder now than ever as a result of the large trucks that the industry requires. They run non-stop 24 hours a day through town, and yeah, the noise is louder than ever.
Whilst the increase in traffic represents an inconvenience for local people, the high volume of trucks point to far more serious problems.
Once the chemicals are injected and the fracturing process is complete, a large percentage of that fluid comes back up. So we have purposely polluted large quantities of fresh water with chemicals that do not belong in the human environment. And now we have the responsibility, the industry and the landowners have a responsibility to dispose of them properly. But we're talking enormous quantities.
Whereas energy-rich Texas has over 11,000 disposal wells, the temperate geography of Pennsylvania means that only a few exist, hardly enough to cater for the thousands of wells planned in coming years. But the safe disposal of frack fluid is not the only concern.
The amount of fluid that's running around out there, literally, in tanker trucks, you know, thousands of tanker trucks, is such that one tanker truck going off the road with fracking chemicals in it into a river would pretty much wipe it out. This is like taking that rough and tumble, highly industrialized activity and plopping it right down in the Cotswolds. You know, maybe not such a good idea.
Truman Burnett's retirement dream has been destroyed after a gas industry truck spilled a small amount of polluted frack water onto his property.
My wife had some health problems, and this was her recovery area, and we had a little bit of heaven. The only thing you heard at nighttime here was your heartbeat. Now it's just totally devastated. And the water dumped out, down off their pad, down across my land, into my pond, through the pond and into the wetland here alongside me. And what it did, it killed the pond, killed the fish, killed everything in the pond. No frogs, no turtles, nothing. Our drinking water in our house has high concentrations of lead. They've recommended it, or they've told us not to drink it and don't bathe in it. From our heaven, now it's turned into our hell.
The estimate of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Preservation is one serious environmental concern for every 150 wells drilled to date. You do the math. If we're talking hundreds of thousands of wells, we're doing hundreds or thousands of spills. That's called cumulative impact. So it goes to the heart of your question. Why are you not seeing all these things yet? Because the cumulative impact is accumulating. Come back in 10 years.
The ecologist met with an ex-gas industry employee who described a spill on a site that he worked on.
Some of the sites are well regulated, yeah, where DEP and OSHA and stuff like that, where they're right on them and stuff, yeah, they're well regulated. But the rest of the 95% of them, where they're not going to go out to the site and look at them, no. No, they're not well regulated. Some of them are real bad. I've seen chemicals come out of the side, literally the side. It looked like the mountain was bleeding. It looks like a plateau. They had the pad here, and they have like the barrier fence around it, and there was just like this red, nasty water just coming, just oozing out the side of the mountain, just the side of the hill. So they're not doing something right.
But a toxic cocktail of chemicals is not the only worrying component in frack wastewater. Critics argue it could contain far more dangerous substances.
These shale deposits are rich in radium, radium-226. The level of radium in the Marcellus is about 267 times the safe disposal amount, meaning it'll kill you. So there's anecdotal evidence that these frac fluids will leach uranium out of these shale deposits. There's also radon in these shale deposits. So in addition to the fracking fluid, which we know is toxic, the frac flowback leaches radium out of the shale. The radium is carcinogenic, and that's something that's being introduced to the surface in a spill that wasn't there before.
As the profile of the potential dangers of hydraulic fracturing grows, both public and experts are becoming increasingly concerned by the rapid expansion of fracking. But the gas industry have hit back with expensive ads, PR campaigns, and high-level lobbying.
It's the cost-benefit of BS, of PR, of ads, and payoffs to politicians is extraordinary. The return on investment of paying off a politician, running an ad, discrediting critics, it's one of the best investments that the industry can make.
Although they declined an opportunity to speak on camera, a spokesperson for the Marcellus Shale Coalition, which represents the gas industry, told The Ecologist that gas extracted from fracking is both safe and a panacea for America, offering a fuel that is both a cleaner and a more secure choice than relying on foreign energy supplies. But Professor Ingrafia disagrees.
Because in general, in the usage framework, oil and gas are not interchangeable. Petroleum is largely used for transportation. Natural gas is largely used for heating and for industrial activity. So until you can show me a plan as part of a national energy plan to transform our transportation system in the United States to one that uses natural gas, all right, that argument is specious. Natural gas burns cleaner than any other fossil fuel.